Hello, this is Vicki Livingston with 4G Americas. I'd like to welcome you to the 4G Americas live webinar. This is part of a mini-series that we're offering that's part of 5G Week with 4G Americas. Our first session is now, and then tomorrow we will offer another session that will focus more on 5G technology concepts, and we welcome you to attend that webinar as well. I'm going to start by introducing very briefly our participants, the experts who will be presenting during this webinar. The webinar will last 1 hour, and during this time we invite you to submit your questions in the question box that you see on the side of your screen. We will be taking as many questions as we can following the presentations. Our first speaker today is Chris Pearson. He is the president of 4G Americas. And following his introduction and overview of our role as an association in the area of 5G spectrum development, we have two co-presenters. The first will be Anders Svensson, who is the Principal Solution Manager at Ericsson. And Anders and the following speaker were both co-leaders of our 4G Americas white paper that was recently published. It was called 4G Americas Vision for the Americas, 5G Spectrum Recommendations, and that paper is available to everyone on our website at 4gamericas.org. Following Anders' presentation, Reza, Arefi, he's Director of Spectrum Strategy at Intel, will wrap up the formal slide presentation. And then all three, Chris Pearson, Anders Svensson, and Reza Arefi will be able to answer your questions. And I will be moderating that session. So now I'd like to ask Chris if you will kick us off.
Well, thanks, Vicki, for that introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone that's out there participating in today's webinar. A key part of this webinar is not only the presentations that we will be providing to everybody during the beginning of the webinar, but also the interaction of getting your questions and being able to answer some of the really tough or top-of-mind questions about 5G spectrum and where the industry is going on it. Next slide. To start out, though, to give you some background on who 4G Americas is 4G Americas is a wireless industry association, and we're comprised of 16 leading operators and vendors that are dedicated to the 3GPP family of technology, and specifically LTE, LTE Advanced, and their evolution and revolution toward 5G. We focus on three main areas. The first would be what would be called technical facilitation and coordination. The second would be regulatory policy. And the third would be overall industry education. We work on these three kind of integrated areas to provide the wireless industry the opportunity to progress over time. And that is why we're here to talk about 5G. 5G spectrum is something that actually falls into many of these areas. It falls into the technical side because things have to be developed. It falls into the regulatory side because we obviously need more spectrum. And finally, the overall education of spectrum and what is needed in the future is good for the industry. Next slide. So today's webinar is all about spectrum, though. Spectrum, spectrum, and spectrum. So why do we focus on spectrum? Well, as you see from a few of these famous quotes from FCC chairman today and in the past, we need spectrum. It is vital to the industry for us to move forward and progress to get more spectrum to work with to serve society's connected needs. One of the things that people talk about a lot is, well, as we advance technology, spectrum becomes less important because technology should be able to do everything. But the reality is it's not. It's a partnership. And the partnership is technology evolves, and it evolves fast. I mean, if you look at how far and fast that we have come in the last 10 years in providing better efficiencies, more capacity, better services, it's amazing. But that partnership needs to be between technology evolution and sometimes technology revolution and spectrum. It's a marriage that needs to happen in the past. It's a marriage that needs to happen today, and it's a marriage that needs to happen in the future. Next slide. So why do we need that marriage? Why do we need more spectrum? Why do we need 5G technologies to continue, to evolve and the concepts to move forward? Well, if you look at our data demand slides, these are like rocket ship slides. I mean, the trend for connecting society continues to move forward with more and more needs from society. It's not just a smartphone, it's not just a tablet, it's the Internet of Things, and it's the need for connectivity anywhere, anytime, and with good speeds and good coverage. So most industries in the world would love this opportunity. I mean, any industry that says you're growing at 57% a year would just be amazed. They'd say they're in the best industry in the world. And I do believe that we are in the best industry in the world. But with that opportunity is also a challenge. And that challenge is, how does the industry meet this mobile data demand today and in the future? Next slide. So even as we look at 5G, 5G is expected to be deployed in the 2020 and beyond range. And so why would we be talking about it today? Well, even recently a blog by the FCC chairman, Tom Wheeler, talked about the importance of looking at high-band spectrum for the future, and also about how in the past the U.S. has led the world, partly because we have been having some foresight into providing spectrum to the market early in the process. And if you look at LTE today, the U.S. leads in LTE in many different statistical categories. And one of the reasons really was the fact that we released 700 megahertz type of spectrum to the market early. And that spectrum was then utilized for LTE. Next slide, please. And finally, the reason that you talk about 5G spectrum today in 2015, even though 2020 is the typical forecast for when 5G would be available, is it takes a long time to get spectrum to the marketplace. And so the timing is correct. The timing is right for associations like 4G Americas, working with government agencies, working with other associations to start the planning process about what is needed for the marketplace when you look at 5G spectrum possibilities. So with that, again, I'm honored to be here participating in this webinar today on 5G spectrum, and look forward to the questions, and I'll turn it back over to Vicki.
Thank you very much, Chris, and we appreciate that introduction. And next we will have Anders Svensson, who is a Principal Solution Manager at Ericsson and also a co-leader in the recently published 4G America's white paper on 5G Spectrum Recommendations.
Thank you, Vicki. I will start presenting a little bit about what is the driver for the spectrum when it comes to 5G. What we see in the market today is that many industries are in the process of transforming the business and products to digitalizing and mobilizing their products. Sometimes this is referred to building the product smart, meaning that they digitalize it, or getting them connected, mobilizing. Example of industries are automotive, transport and logistics, utilities, and all of them are now looking into how they should transform the business into a more mobile world. So digitalizing and mobilizing creates the need for a common platform, which is what 5G will provide. That will be a platform that have storage, compute, and networking in order to address the needs for the new industries. The networking part, which is one of the most important part here, will be the leading and driving the connectivity. And because of that, there will be need more capacity and coverage in order to drive and satisfy the demand that is needed for the 5G in the time frame that Chris described before. So 5G is envisioned to provide the connectivity in order for all these new industries to leverage the connectivity. Next slide. So what are the things that we can see other than the industries adapting? So another trend that we also see is that the usage and adaptation of used data, especially video, is increasing and will continue to increase over the next couple of years. This drives a need for ubiquitous coverage of throughput that is available to support the high-definition videos that is expected to be used on smaller devices, and we see a trend that people are demanding the use of even high resolution on small devices because of the short viewing distance. This drives a higher capacity in the network and will require more spectrum to be available in order to provide a wide area coverage of the service. Also, video calling like FaceTime and Skype are getting more and more used, and that will also set requirements on lower latencies as well as higher throughput in the network. So if we look on the forecast, as Chris previously showed some of it as well, we see a yearly growth of roughly 40% a year over the next 5 years, and the individual use of data will be roughly going from 2.4 gigabytes to 14 gigabytes per month. And of this traffic, roughly 60% is video. So the trend of that video will have a very significant part of the service that is offering our mobile network drives a need for spectrum, both in the higher band but also in the lower band in order to provide the ubiquitous coverage to enable people to use the video wherever they are. Next slide. I don't know if it's updated yet, but so the other piece of 5G that is enabling the new industries is that we are going into two other type of deployment and applications. The massive machine type communication application, which is driving the need for capacity as well as being able to cover areas where you have sensors, where you use variables, building the smart cities and application in order to support automation of industries to create the efficiencies that they are looking into for the transformation of their business. The other piece of 5G that is targeted is the ultra reliable and low latency machine type communication, where you enable high speed video enabled to remotely control devices and not be need to be in the location where you actually do the work, where you are, for example, in mining or other type of industries that you want to do. There's also the drones that are getting more and more interested to use and used in different applications, which could also be control of these type of systems. This require very high reliability as well as low latency, but also if you want to have video on these devices, it requires a high bandwidth as well. Next slide. And lastly, as more and more of our use of mobile data is adapted by the general public, it will also demand that when we are going to events and other happenings, we would like to share our experience with our friends. The use of social networks are driving this more and more. This requires the network to be able to have very high speed in very dense settings to allow the use of simultaneously use of video of many users at the same time. To provide this, 5G will require to have spectrum in higher bands in order to get the available spectrum in the markets. So this will then enable 5G to build on wider channels which can provide a higher throughput to many users at the same time in a single location. Next slide. So how did we structure this in the document or in the white paper that we created? We started to look a little bit on the different scenarios. Like I already described, we have the enhanced mobile broadband, which is very much related to video and driving our video capacity. Machine-to-machine type communication, which is the more massive deployment of sensors and applications, as well as ultra-reliable and low-latency communication. That is kind of the scenarios that we can see for different applications. Then we mapped, and ITUR have done this as well in their IMT vision, is that we map the applications into the different scenarios in order to kind of see what type of requirements they have on the network. This was then used as the base for evaluating what application needs there are for Spectrum in order to provide the capacity and the service that is necessary for these applications. Next slide, please. So if you then look on demand can be described, the demand that we see from the applications when we map them together is that it can be described in three different ways in our order how do we solve it. We have the use cases which will be demanding different type of features and in order to provide the service that is necessary for these use cases. We have new technologies that enable us to take use of better efficiencies but also new resources like Spectrum. And then we have the Spectrum aspect that is added on in order to enable the capacity needs that is necessary for the 5G deployment in the 2020 timeframe. What is essential here now is that we are looking into and have a collaboration between the regulators in order to go into the next conferences for radio and allocating of Spectrum as the next phase now in 2015 as well as 19. And it's important that we, in order to build the ecosystem, it's important that we are aligning the Spectrum in a good way in order to provide the capabilities and have the Spectrum available for the 5G deployment. Next slide. So 5G is coming, and I think the importance here is that we are start looking into the Spectrum access already now. Chris mentioned that earlier as well, where now is the time to start looking and planning for how we get the Spectrum available in the time frame when the 5G will be deployed. This will be essential in order to fulfill the capacity needs that will be necessary for 5G. The benefit is that 5G will have the capabilities in order to utilize new Spectrum in higher bands, which will then allow us to allocate these Spectrum for 5G deployment. And that will serve as a vehicle for deliver demands in order for the 5G applications. However, with the need for also have ubiquitous coverage of video in wide area, it's also important that we secure the lower bands and have a spectrum of bands all the way down from lower bands where we are today with 4G deployment all the way up to the new Spectrum in the millimeter wave. And all of these need to be considered when we're now going in to decide the plan for Spectrum for 5G. Next slide, please. So this was a summary of the drivers for 5G and aspects that need to be considered in order to allocate spectrum for 5G. And I will now hand over to Reza Arefi, Director of Spectrum Strategy at Intel, and who also was my co-leader for the white paper that we have developed for 4G Americas. And he will go through a little bit more deeper on the methodologies and the findings of what spectrum needs we have for North America. Thank you.
Thank you, Anders, for the introduction and also for setting the stage here by going through specifically on the use cases for 5G that has been envisioned by industry as well as by the ITUR. When we look at the three main usage scenarios and all the applications that fall within one or potentially more than one usage scenario, and by the way, when we talk about these applications and scenarios, we're talking about the vision today. Of course, future might bring in additional or different kinds of use cases that we need to adapt to. But as the way we see it today, these applications are going to be driving high-level requirements in terms of technical requirements and spectrum requirements, and that would then translate into various frequency bands that could be used to cater those applications. Each of these applications they might have different needs in terms of reach, in terms of throughput, in terms of quality of service, latency, etc., that we need to pay attention to in order to create systems that are optimized for 5G. And therefore, the methodology that will be used to come up with spectrum needs of 5G, various applications of 5G. There are multiple factors that need to be taken into account, and in the white paper we have detailed this. For instance, a few important parameters that need to be considered are multi-operator deployments, where both inter-system and intra-system interference could be taken into account, and the spectrum impacts of that need to be taken into account. Frequency reuse, the need for multiple carriers also needs to be taken into account. Need for guard bands, for things like that. Also, radio interface capabilities, as spectral efficiency increases and improves, and multi-antenna systems and better coding systems are being developed. Those also impact the better, more efficient use of spectrum. All of that needs to be taken into account when we look at the spectrum needs of 5G in the next few years. And when we look at the variety of spectrum, and in the next slide we'll see that some of the potential requirements for such applications, we'll see that there's need for spectrum in a variety of ranges and bands. Next slide, please. The white paper covers this in more detail, but here is a snapshot of some of the requirements that various 5G applications would have based on our knowledge today, and some of the potential spectrum-related implications that they have. Just to give you a couple of examples, for instance, the first row, in order to cater the ultra high-speed connection for instance, for ultra high-definition video 4K, 8K, of course, we need ultra high-speed connections, and those mean that you need ultra-wide contiguous carrier bandwidths in order to accommodate that. In addition, you also would need multi-gigabit backhaul links in order to connect all those different base stations and access points into the core network. So these are the requirements that come from the application. To give you another example, for instance, from the category of ultra reliable, low latency kind of applications, which we need to operate, for instance, in factory environments, for automation purposes, and those those access points or stations are always operating around, obstacles that I might reach beyond walls and floors and all that, and that implication for that is that they need some lower frequencies to get the range that's needed. So in short, variety of applications need variety of implications, have variety of implications, and need variety of spectrum to deal with. Next slide, please. When we look at the spectrum that exists so far for 3G and 4G, of course, they're all below 6 gigahertz, actually below 4 gigahertz, what's available now. And of course, the WRC 15 in a couple of months is going to look at additional spectrum below 6 gigahertz for INT for these for evolution of 4G, and that is of course quite important because not just because of evolution of 4G, but also for preparation for 5G. But we also need spectrum in bands above 6 gigahertz to cater to some applications that, as I just mentioned, would need very large contiguous spectrum for wide channels. And when you take into account multiple operator situations and potential for interference mitigations and all that, you end up with a large amount of spectrum that could not be found below 6 gigahertz. So having access to a variety of bands is key in the view of 4G Americas to success of 5G. Next slide, please. So in preparation for this, a lot of things have been happening around the world. Most notably in the U.S., towards the end of last year, December 2014, we had the FCC publishing a notice of inquiry, NOI, seeking comments on a variety of spectrum bands that could be used for 5G, starting from 24 gigahertz all the way up. In the meantime, also the United States has agreed on a set of bands to be proposed WRC 19 for 5G purposes, and they start from the 28 gigahertz and go up. Other countries are doing the same. They are discussing the potential new bands above 6 gigahertz that could be used. Of course, as I said, the bands below 6 gigahertz are already under consideration for a WRC 15. And as you look at, and the details of this are on the white paper, whether as you look at the bands, there are overlaps, there are common bands across regions and countries that we have captured here, some of the ones that were available. From regional point of view, in the Asia Pacific region, they've already agreed on their common bands to be proposed, and they start at 25 gigahertz. There are, however, individual administrations within that region that might have also additional bands in addition to the common proposals. The CEPT has not finalized their position yet. They're meeting next week to exactly do that. However, in the Americas region, we have a common proposal. So if you could move to the next slide, please. We'll talk about the proposal from CTEL. So the CTEL meeting happened a couple of weeks ago, and here you see a list of bands that is supported by the entire region. The proposal came from 10 countries, no opposition, and at the end, this list is the list of bands. As you can see, there are bands below 30 gigahertz as well as bands above 30 gigahertz, and especially the 28 gigahertz band is one likely common band in the Americas and some of the Region 3 administrations, such as potentially Korea, Japan, and China, and it's also one of the bands of that the FCC is considering as part of was in the NOI is likely to be included in the NPRM that would be coming out. Next slide, please. Just to put things in perspective a little bit, so this table here has the current spectrum allocations to cellular, as you can see here, and also some of the future potential bands coming up. If the incentive auctions happens, hopefully get some more spectrum at around 600 megahertz. Probably more definitive piece would be the 3.5 gigahertz band, with the proceeding almost completing, and there's some potential for getting more spectrum at 5 gigahertz for unlicensed, and also the above 6 gigahertz bands as part of the NOI and the future NPRM. Next slide, please. This slide again highlights the U.S. recommendation for bands to be considered or to be studied for 5G in the run-up to WRC 19. The proposal is for WRC 15 to agree on studying these bands for WRC 19, and as you can see, these are also included in the CTEL regional proposal as well. Next slide, please. Now, why regional and global harmonization is important? Of course, when we look at the process of developing devices and networks, harmonization always reduces the complexity and the cost of devices and also deployments. And at the end, it benefits consumers through economies of scale, as vendors and operators can deal with harmonized networks all around. That could be a lot of things that could be reused. In that sense, the international groups such as the ITU or regional groups such as CTEL could play a significant role in bringing some global harmonization or even regional harmonization. And I need to, as a footnote here, to say when we say global harmonization, we're basically dealing with major markets to start with. We know this harmonization doesn't happen overnight. And specifically for the upcoming events this year, WRC 15, it's important that administrations and regional groups emphasize on getting an agenda item for WRC 19 to look at 5G spectrum and conduct studies on a range of frequencies that could be used globally or regionally for identification for 5G. And I emphasize on a range of frequencies here. And also consideration of bands that could accommodate various 5G use cases, not just very low spectrum or very high spectrum, but a variety of bands that that could be used to cater for different kinds of applications that are envisioned for 5G. And specifically for the FCC, it's important that the engagement with the industry continues, and NPRM, as the chairman has alluded to, be published so we can have a venue for getting some agreement and consensus and what service rules for these bands would look like, and of course active support for in the two WRCs, future WRCs. Next slide, please. The white paper also looks at various licensing schemes and the role they could play in 5G. And the conclusion was that both licensed and unlicensed, as well as shared licensed access, have a role to play here. For applications, specifically for applications that require dedicated spectrum with predictable quality of service, of course, licensed operation is key. On the other hand, the way unlicensed spectrum has worked as complementary to 3G and 4G in terms of, for instance, offload. We see that the same trend could happen in 5G, and there's also a need for that kind of complementary operation of unlicensed bands with the licensed 5G bands as well. But there's also room for shared license access to play a role here in 5G, specifically because some of the bands that potentially could be used for 5G are encumbered by operating systems that are operational, and there are, in some cases, there could be chances for a coordinated access whenever or wherever that's possible. And this could, of course, facilitate timely access to spectrum for some of these bands that could be used as shared bands. So all of these licensing schemes have a role to play in 5G. And this is, again, detailed in the white paper. Next slide, please. The white paper also looked at some of the solutions in order to enable access to some of these new bands, especially the higher bands. The paper looks at various ways that incumbent systems could be protected. Protection of incumbent bands, of course, is important. There needs to be studies done to facilitate this. It's important that these studies use realistic models and parameters, so the answers are something we can rely on. Interference mitigation techniques need to be looked at. For instance, sensing database, some of the things that have been used in previously for other bands, and maybe some new techniques and technologies could be also come into play here. There are also propagation-related challenges in getting access to these new bands, and the paper it goes in detail into some of the impairments and how to cope with them. On the other hand, the semiconductor technology and antenna technology improvements and advancements in the past few years would be helping quite a lot in getting access to these new bands, and these are witnessed by, for instance, the commercial products that we see these days on 60 gigahertz bands that are available now. Next slide, please. So we get to conclusions. In summary, the paper makes the case for the need for a variety of bands to address the variety of applications and use cases of 5G that need both coverage and capacity needs. The need for frequencies beyond those that are traditionally used for cellular systems need to go beyond 6 gigahertz to get the advantages that come with such frequencies. The paper also emphasizes that while lower frequencies have better propagation characteristics for better coverage cases, there's also need for going into higher frequencies, even millimeter wave frequencies, in order to get the large contiguous bandwidths that are needed to meet the demands of some of the applications, such as, for instance, ultra high definition video. Next slide, please. However, as 4G systems evolve, and you saw that in one of the earlier slides presented by Chris, that there is a long cycle for spectrum to become available and fully operational. There will be need for spectrum bands below 6 gigahertz to be developed in order to migrate into 5G, in order to enhance LTE, and also in order to experiment with some of the pre-5G concepts. However, despite the challenges, mobile industry is capable of extending mobile operation into higher bands. And at the end, last but not least, action by regulators is quite important to ensure that the spectrum needs of 5G is addressed by finding the right spectrum for evolution of 4G into 5G and also new spectrum bands for 5G. That brings us to the end of the presentation, and I turn it back to Vicki. Thank you.
Okay, Vicki. Okay, I don't hear Vicki on the line, so this is Chris Pearson, the 4G Americas. So
I apologize, Chris. I was on mute. A bad mistake.
Okay. All right, go for it.
So I'll start again. Hello, this is Vicki Livingston. I'm head of communications for 4G Americas. I apologize for the glitch. I would like to thank our presenters, Chris Pearson, Anders Svensson, and Reza Arefi, for their presentations. I've got a number of questions, and I've been busy monitoring the questions, and I'd like to start right away by asking a question of Chris. Has the U.S. government allocated spectrum for 5G? And tied to that, a further question, how likely is it that Congress will pass legislation this year that identifies additional bands for auction and licensed use?
Oh, okay, great question. So, number one, when the U.S. typically provides spectrum to the mobile broadband industry, it actually doesn't put a generational term behind it or even a specific technology. So that's why we've had lots of technology competition even within our exclusive use licensed spectrum. So the first question is they probably won't say specifically 5G. However, what we have seen, and it's been referred to in our presentation, is that the U.S. is very much involved in looking at spectrum in the future, and specifically what would be considered high-band spectrum, which is part of the story that you just heard from Reza for 5G. And that high-band spectrum, there was the FCC put out a notice of inquiry in 2014. That is expected to be followed with a notice of proposed rulemaking will follow. So they're looking at it. And additional to that, as Reza pointed out in his presentation, the U.S. government did move forward with their recommendations for, again, high-band spectrum to be studied. So there is a lot going on. What are the chances of U.S. legislation being passed soon regarding spectrum? I don't know of a forecast on that. However, again, I do see the U.S. government and the FCC definitely looking at possible spectrum band, what would be considered high-band spectrum for 5G.
Okay, and then also related to that, timing-wise, when should the spectrum selections be nailed down before 2020 deployment? In other words, if we want to have 2020 deployment, what would be the deadline on those spectrum selections and allocations by governments? And what about harmonization agreement? I don't know if Chris or Reza want to answer that question.
Reza, you want to start, and then I can finish?
Sure. Usually it takes, it varies from country to country. Regulators have different processes for these things, but usually it takes about a year or two from allocation of the spectrum before deployments actually get started. Now, for countries who are waiting for a WRC 19 decision and action, of course, that the clock starts after WRC 19 in early 2019. But we think in the U.S. it is possible that we see action earlier. Chris, anything else on that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, CTIA pointed out this year that it takes about 13 years from identification of spectrum and allocation or reallocation of spectrum to the deployment time frame. So it does take a while typically, but you did see the FCC chairman in the blog talk about, a high band spectrum NPRM coming out soon, and then he also even talked about the 600 megahertz TV incentive auction spectrum. So I think a lot depends on how fast the technology evolves for 5G, the technology concepts, which there'll be a webinar on tomorrow at 4G Americas. But it does take a while, and so it remains to be seen exactly. Now, the other question you had, part of that was harmonization. How important is that? It's extremely important, and I think in Reza's slide you saw that there is some bands, 10 bands that CTEL has come up with to be recommended to be studied. 5 of those 10 were the U.S. recommendations as well. So we see a lot of involvement of the governments trying to get some harmonization amongst the bands, and that's a good thing.
Okay, what action is actually anticipated at WRC 15 and then later at WRC 19? Maybe Reza, do you want to reply?
Sure. WRC 15 is looking at a set of bands. They're all below 6 gigahertz, of course, but a set of bands for identification to be identified for INT. These bands range from below 1 gigahertz, everything that's on the table, below 1 gigahertz all the way to 6 gigahertz in various parts of the spectrum. And regional groups have come up with their favorite bands among all of those, but we could also see country-specific proposals or multiple countries getting together. Also, that kind of action is also possible. However, WRC 15 is also expected to look at an agenda item for the next conference after that, which is WRC 19. And one of the potential agenda items would be spectrum, to consider spectrum for 5G and to study it between 2015 and 2019. And once that happens in 2019, the expectation is to see decisions made on new spectrum for 5G.
Okay, here's a question for Anders. Even though 5G is in the 2020 timeframe, it seems there is movement to introduce pre-5G or even 4.5G shutter. How should we think about these approaches? Are these vendor and perhaps specific, or is there anything that is being done to limit this possible confusion?
So what we see is that the 5G will encompass on 2 parts. It will be an evolution of LTE as well as a new air interface that will be added to spectrum that is newly deployed. As part of the evolution of the LTE advanced and into an evolution into 5G, there will be components that will be utilized in 5G that can be deployed also in prior to the final 5G specification is done. And they will be deployed as part of the LTE advanced or LTE evolution track. There will be probably before the final specification for also the next generation air interface be trials and limited deployment earlier than that, but the standard need to have its pace in order to build the ecosystem for wide area deployment or wide deployment of the 5G systems. So in principle, there will be an evolution of the LTE with capabilities, for example, in IoT and other aspects that will be implemented, which will then be going in to be part of the 5G system as well. But there will also be new things that is not coming in until the final specification is done.
Chris, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think it's an excellent answer. I mean, the 5G technology concepts are both evolutionary and revolutionary. So anything that's evolutionary and then can be deployed on an LTE advanced platform, I think you see that makes sense for operators. Then they're going to go out and do that deployment. Some of them that are more revolutionary will be, have to wait until they're ready for prime time. The key here, though, I think, what Anders said was that we need the standard to be set for the wireless ecosystem to develop the way it has for LTE. So LTE is the fastest growing mobile broadband technology in the world, in part because it's a very set standard that everyone is manufacturing and creating this great wireless ecosystem for.
Okay. Question on what bands below 6 gigahertz do you think are the best candidates for initial 5G deployments? Perhaps Reza?
Thank you. At this point in time, it's probably difficult to predict what's going to happen at WRC 15, although we have some ideas based on regional positions, but it will depend on the outcome of WRC 15. But when we look at the existing spectrum, of course, the existing 3G and 4G spectrum is being used by 3G and 4G systems, and they will continue to be used by 3G and 4G systems. So if you look at new spectrum below 6 gigahertz, probably the better opportunity where we can get larger chunks of spectrum that could accommodate some of these 5G applications would be C-band from 3.4 to 4.2 gigahertz. That some of it is already available to IMT systems, and some of it is not, and then it varies in different countries. Maybe we see some more action at WRC 15 with respect to that piece of spectrum.
Thank you. Anders, is the goal of 4G Americas and various standard bodies working on 5G to have one standard across all manufacturers, or will it be similar to previous G rollouts where various technologies are all considered to be of a particular generation?
So I would say that the goal is to have a common standard and drive in order to build the ecosystem for devices and all for the applications, and it will be desired to have a single system that can provide the access for the 5G. This naturally will be part of the discussions going forward when we set the standardization in order to drive the different proposals of technologies that will be used. But the desire in order to build a global ecosystem would be to have one solution that can provide the capability that's needed.
Okay, for Anders, is it correct that Ericsson believes that new spectrum below 6 gigahertz for 5G will be mostly for unlicensed carrier aggregation?
Can you repeat that?
Is it correct that Ericsson believes that new spectrum below 6 gigahertz for 5G will be mostly for unlicensed carrier aggregation?
No, I don't think so. That will be determined by the regulator how they want to allocate the spectrum below 6 gigahertz as well. And I envision that it will be both licensed and unlicensed spectrum that will be allocated going forward. And maybe Reza, you can have your perspective on that as well, based on the discussion in WRC.
Yes, thank you. I think what I said in response to the previous question also covers that we also think that there'll be some opportunities for licensed spectrum as well.
So is it even possible for 5G without more spectrum allocations? Reza?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll take that. This is Chris. So yeah, I mean, 5G, if you look at, most governments around the world now are moving to processes of making spectrum available, and then the mobile broadband industry would decide how to use the, typically we want exclusive use licensed spectrum. And then the industry would decide, or the companies that obviously win that spectrum decide what to put in that. So is it possible to put 5G in existing bands or bands that might come out in the next year or two. Yes, it is definitely. Obviously, if it's existing bands, it takes quite a bit of complexity to do that because you're looking at refarming, and refarming can affect existing users. So it remains to be seen if it would be done. Obviously, with LTE, we found at 4G Americas that one of the key vital ingredients to seeing LTE deployments in a country, and that would be whether it was the United States or Brazil or Panama, was new spectrum being brought to the marketplace. So that could very well be the same thing for 5G. But again, if the technology develops fast enough and operators see the value in that technology, they could look at refarming existing spectrum.
Okay, we're getting close to the end of our webinar, so we have a couple more questions I'm going to try to slip in very quickly here. Recalling that the FCC permits any G in any of the mobile radio bands, should we expect refarming of spectrum currently operating GSM will be the first to 5G, or would it be UMTS or LTE? And would we expect 600 megahertz will be the first band to deploy 5G? Whoever wants, take it.
So it's similar, this is Chris Pearson, so similar to my last answer, it would be up to the operator to decide when and if they wanted to do a refarming of spectrum that's already in their portfolio, or would they wait till the opportunity comes for new spectrum. So really that's a commercial market decision and a technology decision by the operator. In many countries, again, the operator has a choice of what he can put in there. Again, it's not the Gs or it's not a specific technology. So an operator would have to look at their portfolio, whether it would be GSM or CDMA 2000 or wideband CDMA, UMTS, or LTE, and try to figure out exactly what they would want to do. I would think that having operators that just spent billions and billions of dollars on putting in LTE infrastructure with their latest devices being LTE, that most likely LTE would not be one of the candidates to be refarmed, but they would be looking at more of their older technologies that are in there.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And what is 4G America's role in spectrum planning?
So 4G America's had a very robust work program in both the technical aspects and the spectrum aspects of 5G. And through our meetings with government officials and regulators and other associations, as well as other companies in the wireless ecosystem, we play a large role in shaping the industry's future by sharing our recommendations, meeting with administrations throughout the Americas region to kind of shape the wireless future regarding spectrum. We've had meetings, and I've spoken at multiple conferences, and we've obviously put on, we publish white papers, and even in the United States, almost every branch of government has had an interest in meeting with 4G Americas regarding the future of wireless when it comes to 5G, including the executive branch. So we've seen a lot of interest, and 4G Americas has a very robust program in providing recommendations to the industry.
Okay, well, we're nearing the end of our webinar right now, so I'd like to thank the audience for submitting so many questions and keeping our dialogue going. This webinar will be available on our website starting tomorrow, and that's 4gamericas.org, and you are welcome to revisit the site and certainly to download our white paper. We are also featuring another a 5G topic tomorrow, which will focus more on the actual technologies at the same time, and we invite you to attend that webinar as well. We appreciate your interest, and thank you very much for your time. Have a good day.